In this recorded YouTube video that I'll be uploading to my YouTube channel, I'll be talking about the dungeons from Mythic Plus Season 3 in the Dragonflight World of Warcraft expansion. And before we start talking about those things, I do want to tell you that I am so glad that this stupid leaked nonsense was wrong. I cannot stand this whole leaked culture in WoW and just games in general. It's really annoying. And I really wish, there's so much like people want it to be true, right? Like people were telling me that the person who leaked this got the previous season correct. And there's just no way to prove any of that, right? I mean, I don't even know where this came from. But this was the list from the leaked video we made. It's wrong. There's not a single. Actually, no, yeah. Everbloom. That's the only one that's correct. Well, obviously, Dawn of the Infinite. So let's take a look at what the actual list is. Tell you guys the truth about it here. And yeah, we'll talk about it. I want to make this video. We did do a live reaction on the live stream the day it happened. But I do want this video as a standalone for you guys to talk about it because I'm very, 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 very interested in hearing your thoughts on these dungeons. Let's hear a thought on every dungeon if you want to leave that long of a comment. But I'm going to do that. So let's get going. So we have the Dawn of the Infinites, Galacharon's Rise, or Galacharon's Fall, and then Morozan's Rise. So I don't know who those guys are. I've never done this dungeon. I've never even entered it. Never even entered it. Don't see that changing between now and then, but maybe I will. I wanted to try to go in there and like solo some of it, but I'll probably just watch some videos on it. I don't know. But those two are going to be tough, and we talk a lot about this on stream. Players who are not prepared for the dungeon. So now, I'm going to potentially be in that boat, and that's what makes this rotating dungeon thing hard. Because in the past, you'd have the same dungeons for years. So players who played season 1 and 2 could just jump right into season 3 without having to relearn everything. And so Blizzard actually has like the stance for that the opposite should be better, where you don't have to have known all the background to jump in, like if you just start in the middle of the expansion. But I think the counter is just as prevalent and probably worse, because now you're going to have players who look qualified from previous seasons coming into things that they don't actually have any idea about. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. That's what they're doing. We can't change it. But yeah, I don't know anything about those dungeons, but people keep telling me that there's hard bosses. The Chromie, like whatever that fight is, it's really hard. Apparently, it's gonna be hard to pug. I don't know. I have not entered it myself, so we will see. But obviously, they were doing those too. I am disappointed to learn that they're not doing any other actual Dragonflight dungeons. I really enjoyed the Dragonflight dungeons. This kind of thing does make me think that they will do a season 4, which is maybe all the Dragonflight dungeons. We were also kind of hoping that they would just do 10 dungeons. I was hoping to see 4 Dragonflight dungeons, 2 the mega dungeons, and then another 4. I think that would have worked out well. What's your ideal actual number? I know a lot of people say 10. A lot of people say 8. I think more than 10 is too much because then you have way too many keys. Like you just can't do them all in 1 week, and you're, especially early in the season, not going to be able to get score from all of them, so it takes a really long time. But yes, the first one on the list is no surprise, really. Whoever leaked that other one and didn't put Darkheart Thicket, kind of not very intelligent person. But yeah, Darkheart Thicket, that was like, just like they had Neltharius and Neltharian's Lair together. It was pretty clear that they were going to do DHT and Everbloom. Very similar themes to the actual expansion, or the actual patch, which is, if you haven't heard, Emerald Dream. We're actually going to the Emerald Dream, which is awesome. I can't wait for that. Darkheart Thicket, though, probably one of my favorite Mythic Plus dungeons. I'd say probably top 10. Maybe I'll do a tier list someday. But yeah, top 10. I loved it. Very famous clip on the channel. The first actual clip I ever made while streaming. I got an insane 45 item level Titan Forge. That's like the equivalent of getting a mythic raid piece from LFR. And I got it when I already had a 35 item level Titan Forge. This was a relic though, so it's a lot different than gear nowadays. But yeah, I do miss Titan Forging, as you know. But anyway, that was a very big moment. And I used to love soloing this dungeon. This was definitely my favorite dungeon to solo I've ever done. Very, 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 very soloable. Blood DK dominates this dungeon. Cannot wait to get back in there. So that's definitely the dungeon I'm most excited for. Some people on stream said they're not the most excited for. One thing to not be excited for is the terrible voice acting. It's really not even voice acting, it's just bad writing of the voice acting. Blackrook Hold, another Legion dungeon. Don't like this one very much at all. But the reason I didn't like it mostly was because of how it fixes such a sanguine, and I think quaking was in the game, but it was just like any of the fixes that were restricted to the space that you're in the dungeon. Those would be really, 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 really bad in that dungeon. It's super tight corridors, lots of mobs running around. And yeah, necrotic was the absolute worst in there because there's a hallway. You're running upstairs. The bats, they are not count driven, but somehow they still gave necrotic stacks. It was like impossible. Like, I don't even remember how I survived it ever. So that's gone. Luckily, hopefully they will not return necrotic. And I think hopefully there'll be enough a push around sanguine. Sanguine needs to change, but that's a whole different topic. Waycrest Manor next. So we got 2 Legion, 2 BFA. Waycrest Manor, definitely not the dungeon I would like to see from BFA, but I will tell you that that one is not as bad as some of the other ones. So I'm not necessarily in love with it. My main concern with that dungeon is how sometimes the routing needs to be like changed on the fly. I still don't fully understand how it works, but there's basically like 2 doors and only one's open. And it doesn't open the other one until you kill bosses on the side that was open, which would mean that sometimes you'd be forced going right. And right was just like way, way, way harder. Now that could change in the way that they just balance things better. That could change in the way that they just have all the doors open. And I think they may do that. Or they can just make it so there's not really, why did I even come up? There doesn't need to be a third option over the rings. They could just do 2. Anyway, yeah, so Blackrook Hold, not my favorite. Waycrest Manor, not my favorite, but I recognize their strong kind of like lore and place within the community. A lot of people love those dungeons, especially Waycrest. People who like haunted houses and stuff. So, this is going to be happening right after Halloween. You guys like that kind of stuff, don't you? Atal Dazar, one of my favorite dungeons ever. Not one of my favorite Mythic Plus dungeons ever, because in BFA, you might remember the snapping epidemic. I constantly reference the team that won like $10,000 or whatever the MDI's prize pool was at the time. They win it by snapping like a ton of trash down to the first boss with the tank. So the hunter misdirects the tank runs and grabs everything on the upper layer. Then he misdirects after that. The boss is not able to leave the arena, so he snaps the tank down. And because the tank is now down the layer, so comes the trash snapping down on top of the boss. The worst, like, optical thing you'll ever see in any dungeon. The worst, like, this should just be bannable. Like, honestly, that's just ridiculous. It shouldn't have existed in the first place. And it got to the point where it became mandatory. And guess what? It sucked with the fixes like Sanguine again. So hopefully that's not still in the game. It probably is, though, to be fair. But hopefully it's not still in the game. I really don't want to do that again. But I guess as long as everything's better balanced, I won't necessarily hate it. The problem that I will hate, though, is at the end of the season of the expansion, people start doing a really aggressive, very unfun pug route where they basically run, like, I don't even remember why, a bunch of the left side and then back to the right side or something like that. I like the standard route a lot better. It was a lot more pug friendly. People started demanding doing the other route. Things are different now. We're not going to have that kind of issue anymore. But yeah, realistically, it's a dungeon that I'm looking to get another shot at. As long as they don't continue to have the snapping nonsense go on and people like freak out if you don't do it, I will be very satisfied with that dungeon in the player pool, in the dungeon pool. Then we have Everblom, which is probably my favorite Warlords of Draenor Mythic Plus. I think I like it the most because the setting. It's a really cool setting. And there was a couple really unique things you can do in there. So obviously I think everybody knows about the weird skip where you have to get on an extremely big mount and then you can get caught on the fence. Like it's like kind of like a barrier. And then you just skip the whole right side of the dungeon. Probably still going to be in the game. I think they fixed it. I haven't done it in a very long time, but it's probably still going to be in the game. And honestly, it's probably a good thing if it is, because you were able to not have to worry about count and still skip all those mobs on the right. If I remember correctly, the mobs on the right were very, very unfun to fight. Very hard to pull in mass. But the big thing about that skip was it was only properly overpowered because you could pretty much one-shot the bosses with Dark Simulacrum. So if you don't know what Dark Simulacrum is, it's a spell that used to be very similar to Spell Reflect in Warlords of Draenor. There was like 4 or 5 different spells like this where an enemy would cast on you and then you would just straight up return it to them. Dark Simulacrum was the best one for Underrot, not necessarily the best one for other situations and dungeons, but it was because the cast bosses would do insane damage to you and you would just literally take it and return it to them and it would pretty much one-shot them, which is ridiculous. But yeah, I'm sure you can go see old footage of the second and third boss getting pretty much one shot or soloed one way or the other by a Blood Death Knight. And I love that. That was awesome. Super interesting. Don't think it would be good for Mythic Plus, but for challenge mode, that was cool stuff. So I don't know what skipping was going to look like because that was only ever possible because you can just pull the bosses like to the extreme sides of the rooms and then just one shot them and then you just move on. And so you would skip all that hard trash in the middle of the dungeon. That's not going to still exist. So realistically, I don't have any idea how to do the dungeon without that. Like, I have never done the dungeon without that. Maybe at the very beginning of the expansion where you just like, because you used to get gear. There was used to be a weekly to go into challenge mode and get gear. Probably did it the regular way once or twice. But anyway, Throne of Tides, a Cataclysm dungeon. I see no real reason that they need to keep adding Cataclysm dungeons. Even Mop and Wad are not my favorite. Like Everbloom, really, there's just so many good Legion and BFA dungeons. There's just no need for it. But they're sticking to their guns with Cataclysm, and Throne of the Tide's probably one of the worst ones they could have chosen. Faxi brought it up on stream the other day, and we looked at it. There's not a lot of good Cataclysm dungeons for Mythic Plus. Let's put it that way. I think we both agreed Tol'vir would be a good one. But other than that, yeah, not really. Maybe or Halls of Origination would be interesting, but it's so long. That's not really many, honestly. Vortex Pinnacle is not a good dungeon at all for Mythic Plus, though, and it kind of works. Like, it's not the worst. The thing about Throne of the Tides is, though, there's optional bosses. There is a giant elevator that takes like a full minute, and it's like if you miss that, you're like, that is not going to work. They're going to have to change that because that elevator is literally going to be deciding key levels. There's a lot of incredibly difficult trash, strange trash, like weird pulls in there. And then I guess the optional boss is like a random mind control target or something. I've not done that optional boss in an incredibly long time, like probably since Cataclysm was out. So I don't really know that much about it. I don't look at that dungeon as a bad dungeon, though. If I think about the layout, I'm like, oh, this could be a good Mythic Plus dungeon. They just got to figure out that hallway. Like there's some trash in there and there's the elevator and all that stuff. I'm not a fan of that. So we'll see how it plays out. Listen, the leak said Grim Batol, dude. If they had Grim Batol in the dungeon, they would basically have to completely redesign the dungeon. So yeah, luckily we didn't get Grim Batol. Throne of Tide's not much better, but yeah, there's just so many good. Like, why did we stop using mop dungeons? What was wrong with mop dungeons? They were true, tried, and tested in challenge mode. A lot of them, like especially Skullomance, that one would make a great addition because you'd have the Skullomance pop back, right? So let me know what you guys think about all these dungeons. Do you love them? Do you hate them? What would you like to have seen instead? And also, do you guys think there's going to be a season 4? I'm formally asking your thoughts on this. I'm going back and forth, so I'm like to hear some opinions on if you guys think there is going to be a season 4, like a new raid as well. Will there be an actual new raid, a full season 4, or will it be like season 4 of Shadowlands? Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.